Okay, we are now recording. So let's go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, my name is Ryan. I've been the one emailing and sending the calendar invitations, he, him. I'm in Somerville and I'm an organizer with Act on Mass. We're an organization trying to increase transparency and accountability in our legislature. Welcome to the launch event for the Right to Strike campaign, organized by public sector workers, educators, and Act on Mass. We are here today because, and a lot of people find this shocking, for over 100 years, it's been illegal for public sector workers to strike in Massachusetts. Now, Section 9A of Massachusetts general law makes that an illegal act. However, the right for private sector workers to strike has been protected in federal law by the National Labor Relations Act since 1935. However, the right to strike for public employees is a state matter. And our state, despite the fact that 12 other states, including California, Ohio, Louisiana, grant public sector workers protections to strike, our state has decided not to. Of course, it is only when workers withhold their rights that they have real power in collective bargaining, real power to advance social and racial justice in their communities, to bargain for fair wages and safe working environments. So it's time to end this archaic prohibition on the right to strike. Before we jump into, we have some terrific speakers lined up, a brief little teacher and educational piece, and then we'll talk about the campaign strategy and plan. But before we do all of that, I wanted to do a quick poll just to assess. Let me go ahead and launch this poll so people could fill this out. Just what best describes your involvement in your local. So I'll give like 15 seconds for people to just drop this in, and then we can go ahead and get started. Give about 15 more seconds because I think we're already at 75% participation of our people here. Okay, over 80% have voted. Gonna go ahead and end polling, share results. Okay, so it seems like a lot of regular and consistent is 62% of regular and consistently involved in your local, kind of 20% in the middle, 26% in the middle, 13% infrequently involved. I'll stop sharing results. But this campaign over the next month is a great opportunity not only to continue to organize in your local, but to bring more people into the conversation. If we don't bring more people into the conversation, we won't be able to build the power we need to remove the ban on the right to strike. So very simply, the campaign strategy, and then I'll turn it over to our first speaker, is to remove Section 9A, the ban on the right to strike in Massachusetts. Over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to have teach-ins. At those teach-ins, we'll invite you, we'll invite other members of your local, and we will talk about, we'll give you all the talking points you need to have conversations with your elected officials, to apply a little bit of pressure to encourage them to vote for this. And we'll also give you all the talking points you need to organize in your communities. Then we will, at the end of April, as part of the budget vote, or as part of the budget, we will file an amendment. We have Representative Eiterhoven, who will speak a little bit later today, who is a co-sponsor on the bill to remove the ban on the right to strike. We'll file that amendment, and then we'll know in a month where our representatives stand, whether in solidarity with public sector workers or not. So with that, it's my privilege to turn it over to Barbara Mataloni, of course, a prolific figure in the public sector labor movement, former president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, and a great activist, writer, and educator. So let me turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you, Ryan, and good evening, everybody. Good to see you all. It's my job to sort of give a broad view of why it matters that we fight for the right to strike. And as I was reflecting on this, the first thing that we always talk about when we think about why striking matters is that when we strike, as Ryan just said, we're at the height of our power. When we can withhold our labor, we can disrupt the workplace enough that management, policymakers, politicians have to attend to us because we have created a crisis for them in our striking. And by not having the right to strike, one of the most important pieces of leverage that we have, I would say the most important and the most potent, is potentially taken away from us. Although I would argue that the only losing strike, the only time a strike is illegal is when you don't win. As long as you win, you're in good shape. But when I was thinking about this, I was really thinking about striking as a fundamental right, not only because it's how we access our power and our collective power, but because it is the place where we really assert our dignity as workers. That the workplace is a place that needs to be, that must be ours as a democratic space, as a space where our voices are the voices that determine what that workplace is going to look like. And by telling us that we cannot assert our power at the workplace, we are also then being told, then it's what we experience all the time as workers, that our dignity doesn't matter, that respect doesn't matter. When we strike for dignity. We strike to say workplaces must be democratic. Educators must have a place where must have autonomy in the work site. And I think that's like a really key piece of why it's important that we strike. And I'm going to say that we strike. And I know this is about legislation to make it legal to strike. I am, as I said, less interested in the legality and more interested in us coming to understand that we should be thinking about our power to strike on a regular basis. It should always be a part of our plan. It should always be a part of our imagination. And that will generate not only from that it is our most powerful space to be, but it generates from, it gets its power because it is the place where we collectively say, we will not be treated except with dignity. We will not be treated except with respect. And we will not be treated except within the context of democratic decision-making in our workplace. And we need to think about striking in part to open up that imaginative space where we as workers understand that we have a right to demand dignity, that we have a right to demand respect, and that we have a right to demand democracy. So that's a key piece that I want you to take away from tonight and to bring to your coworkers as you begin to have a conversation that introduces to them that striking is important, is critical if we are going to have dignity as workers. But it's more than that. Because as public sector workers, when we go on strike, we're going on strike for the public good. We are raising the standards of workers everywhere. We are striking so that the services that we are providing for our community, whether we are sanitation workers, whether we are educators, whether we are hospital workers, we are striking for the quality of care that people in our community will get. So our strikes are always about more than us. They're always about the common good. And beyond that, what we've seen most recently in this country is educators organizing to strike broadly for the common good. So when Chicago Teachers Union went on strike in 2019, they struck for homeless students. They went on strike, and one of their demands that they were able to win was about providing housing for homeless students and extra care for them. In Los Angeles, when they went on strike in 2019 and won, they went on strike to stop the wanding of students, the racist wanding of students in their schools. And they went on strike to get more green spaces in their schools. So the power that we have is about our dignity and respect. It's about the services that we provide for the public good. And when we access it, and boy, I hope we access it here in Massachusetts, we have the power to actually demand changes that influence the lives of our students and the broader community. And we should be using that power. Personally, don't wait for any politician to tell you that it's okay. The only losing strikes, the only illegal strikes are losing strikes. You build the power, you win. And if we have to strike to win the right to strike, I hope that's what we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Barbara. That was amazing. And critical. This is obviously the right to strike is more than just striking. It's for the common good. It's for racial and education justice. So we want to do a quick overview, historical context and grounding of the right to strike and how it's has been such a common tool over the last century, despite not having legal protections. So first, let me introduce Tom Myers, who is a retired social studies teacher, union activist, and former president of the Andover Education Association. He's also a proud member of the Greater Lawrence Education Justice Alliance. And he will quickly walk us through a little bit of historical context and grounding. And also doing that presentation with him is Marianela Rivera, the public education organizer for Jobs with Justice. She's the former vice chair of the Lawrence School Committee and also a steering committee member for the Greater Lawrence Education Justice Alliance. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and turn over first to Tom.
So thank you, everyone. And, I know many of you on the call, and I'm excited to participate in this event. And, just quickly, I mean, there's history here, and I think many of you know what some of the background is, but just to go through it rather quickly, in 1857, the predecessor to the National Education Association, the NEA is founded to influence legislation in education. 1916, the American Federation of Teachers formed, making divergence with NEA and desire to organize teachers. 1919 to 1930, the Boston police strike resulted in state, counties, and municipalities outlawing public sector unions. Sort of ironical that it was a police strike that actually brought that law into fruition. Moving on, I'm unable, I apologize here, let me see if I can, okay. 1930s to 1950s, the Great Depression and educator organizing with no legal protections. 1935, the National Relations Act guarantees the right of many private sector workers to unionize collectively, bargain, and strike. The 1940s, the AFT membership grows dramatically despite legal rights to strike. Educators participate in massive waves of strikes, leading to pay raises. And then the president of the National Federation of Teachers of Chicago, Margaret Haley, is featured here as a pioneer organizer for cost of living adjustments and just protection from overcrowded schoolrooms and against factorizing education, which I think sounds familiar to everybody. It's what they're trying to do with mechanized robotic learning that's currently being stuffed down everybody's throat. Go ahead to the next slide. In the 50s and 60s, public sector unionization works with civil rights and feminist movements, framing unionization as a fundamental civil right. In the 1960s, the AFT abandons the no strike pledge. Strike strategies spread from the private sector unions to public sectors. Educators across the United States turn to strikes and collective bargaining. 1973, the NEA revises its constitution to emphasize rank and file organizing, and the NEA begins to organize strikes. Um, in the 50s to the 70s, public sector unions win collective bargaining and continue illegal strikes. Educators strike 1960s to 70s. By the end of the 70s, 22 states passed public sector collective bargaining laws. 1980 to today, organized attacks against public sector unions, educators and public sector unions became targets of free market advocates and corporate interest after years of winning progressive policies, austerity budgets, privatization, and education reforms. Act 10, I think everybody's well aware what happened in Wisconsin, which decimated public sector union rights, collective bargaining, except for wages. And then Janus came in, which took away our ability to charge people who were benefiting from union collective bargaining and allowed them to opt out. Fortunately, I'm editorializing here. We've been able to, in Massachusetts, through the concerted effort and organizing of the MTA and I believe the AFT, prevent a massive loss of membership. And in fact, we've strengthened our bargaining position, which is critical. And then it goes on, Chicago Teachers Union goes on strike 2012, first time since '87, and ignites a resurgent strike movement, which has taken off. And I think everybody's aware of what happened. And many of them were wildcat strikes, not led by union staff, by union officials, but by rank and file members, which I think is a critical part to mention. Go ahead. And then, despite illegal status, strikes were once commonplace. And you can see how they declined. I'm going to plug in here to 1991. We had a strike vote in Andover, and it completely turned around conditions for several years and allowed us to democratize at a level that I couldn't even begin to have imagined because we were willing to take a strike vote. I can't emphasize enough the importance of that. You can kick it to the next.
Thanks, Tom. I think this is Marinelle will jump in now, but really appreciate
Sure. Now I can take a sip of Heineken now. So thanks.
Enjoy, Tom. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mariana, and I am from Lawrence, Massachusetts, home of the strike that shook America and where the picket line was invented. And I share this with you because every time I look at our mills, I'm filled with pride because of all of those workers who went on strike and all the subsequent strikes that led to the labor laws and rights we have today. So as we look back at the history of striking and educator organizing, we see that in the 1950s through the 70s, the AFT and the NEA relied on organizing strategies centered around strikes and workplace activism. A strategy centered on strikes involves rank and file members and builds their muscle for future organizing work. It also relies on mass negotiations as opposed to the closed door negotiations we see today. And it helps to build an expanding base of educators. So next slide. So as we fast forward to today, we are seeing many of our union brothers and sisters bargaining for the common good, as Barbara mentioned. So bargaining for the common good is an approach to bargaining where public sector unions use contract fights to organize local stakeholders around a set of demands that benefits not just the bargaining unit, but the surrounding community as a whole. It's an opportunity for educators and other public sector employees to be at the table for policy decisions as they have the frontline experience and the perspective needed to make the right systemic changes in our communities. It's also an opportunity for unions to genuinely connect with allies, which maximizes our collective bargaining power as unions, because we no longer stand isolated and open to attack when we have the community invested in our fight for the social and racial justice our communities deserves. And as Barbara mentioned, there are plenty of concrete examples like the Chicago Teachers Union bargaining for affordable housing, and UTLA fighting to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. And this is just a teaser of some of the stuff we'll go over during our teaching. So I hope many of you all will join us and invite some friends. Thank you.
Thanks, Manella. Thanks, Tom. I think that's it. I don't think Tim was able to join us today, so I'll just quickly run through this. So in Dedham in 2019, so 2 years ago, there was an unlawful, this is an article from Labor Notes that Barbara actually penned, I believe. So strikes, there was a 248-2 vote to strike. That was on a Thursday. It lasted for 1 day on Friday. Over the weekend, it resulted in an agreement with the school committee. The movement earned national support from Senators Warren and Markey and Sanders. And it was, to quote the Dedham Educators Association president, Tim Dwyer, a major victory for Dedham educators and their students. So let me stop sharing. And at this point, what we wanted to do was break out into breakout rooms for like 5 to 10 minutes. So we'll make them groups of 3 to 4. And we love people to discuss 2 questions. So the first question is, 1, what were your thoughts about the role of public sector strikes? So what were your thoughts about the role of strikes coming in tonight? Just to kind of like, where were you at? And then 2, if you could organize in your community, what issues would you want to organize around for the common good, for racial and education justice? So let me go ahead and do that now. I'll put everyone in breakout rooms of 3 or 4, and I'll call you back in like 5 or 6 minutes. Again, that's just everyone. Welcome back. I think we had about 100% return rate, so that is a record from breakout rooms, as everyone here probably knows. Any reflections? Did anyone want to share like anything striking? No pun intended, striking from the conversation or like thought-provoking before we introduce our second to last speaker? You can just go ahead and unmute if anyone has thoughts.
Yeah, in my small group, we talked about for a common good bargaining issue, we talked about affordable housing, which like it's something that I care about a lot, but like I didn't really think of it as being related to education, but then talking it out, like, you know, I said, I teach in Medford, a pretty rapidly gentrifying community, and I teach English learners, so I have mostly working class immigrant families, and I've had so many kids have to move away this year. Like I've lost like half my caseload because they're all like, you know, forced to move out, priced out. Yeah. So it was interesting, like talking that out and seeing how that could be a common good bargaining issue.
Yeah, that's so awesome. There's like this fiction that a lot of like bargaining and public sector unions is like only for the profession or only for the worker, only for wages, but that like doesn't stand to like historical experience where public sector workers have been like right at the center of fighting for justice, for taxation, in the civil rights movement. Yeah, great thought. Anyone else? We have like 1 minute before we jump to the next section.
So someone in my group put it really well. He said he's just up for anything. That's all the issues that are out there. We don't have to pick one. There's a lot to strike about.
Amen. There's a lot of work to do.
Our group's sorry.
Now go for it.
Our group's main takeaway, at least when we talk to like our members about the right to strike and striking, is that striking is in itself, you know, the action, but it's also just another tool that we bring to the negotiation table. I think a lot of our members maybe don't understand the kind of bargaining power it brings private unions and unions that do have the right to strike. And it just adds such an entire other level of leverage without even acting to strike, just having it in our toolkit.
Yeah, so true. It's not even, I mean, it's the threat. It's not even the strike itself.
If
We
I
can
could
actually
jump
take
in
another minute. Yeah, by all means, Tom, go for it.
quickly, I think also there's a process. David had asked me when we were in the breakout room, about when we had taken a strike vote and moved in that direction in Andover. And I said what was interesting was the empowerment of teachers as we began to take control over the workplace, and people began to see that in the way that decisions were made in the building, the way they were collectively interacting with each other, and so the process itself is a liberating experience.
Yeah, I remember reading like a quick vignette about Francis Perkins at one point, like 1930s, organizing for textile workers, and like in the actual strike itself, like no more poignant moment in her life. That certainly resonates, Tom. We definitely have a minute if anyone else wanted to share before we move on.
I think something came up in my room, like I work for a planning and development department, and I just feel like there's a lot of the presentation was about the history of like educators unions. I know not completely, but I'm just really curious on the different kinds of strategies we have to utilize for like municipal employee unions that feel really stagnant and disconnected versus like other public sector unions. So I'm just excited to like learn more about that because the union for the city of Newton, for example, stopped meeting because of the pandemic. So like, what do you do with that?
Yeah, definitely a lot of room to like step in and take ownership. Anyone else? And then maybe time for one more thought. Okay, then let me introduce our last speakers before we jump into the final step, which will be the campaign plan. So let me introduce Holly and Colette. They're educators, union members, activists. They'll discuss the right to strike and how it's integral, really integral to the fight for the health and safety in our schools. So Holly and Colette.
So last spring and summer, like educators across the country, our membership was really activated about concerns with reopening and serious concerns about health and safety guidelines. And so our management really refused to address just fundamental questions we had about return, including topics like what kind of PPE are you going to provide for us, and how much of it are you going to provide? What accommodations will you have for educators who have chronic health issues, who are high risk groups? What are our HVAC systems like? And not only did they refuse to really address those issues, but they really dismissed them as well. And so in about mid-July, Holly and I were tasked with starting a contract action team, and we began, having one-to-one conversations with members across the district, and started to hold building meetings and contract action team meetings. And the fear, it was a real fear, and concern was widespread, and people didn't want to go back into the buildings. They were afraid to go back into the buildings, but really felt that their choice, they had this false choice between either just kind of eating that and going back in and putting themselves at the risk of getting, a deadly virus, or losing their jobs, either taking leave of absence that would be unpaid or doing something that would get them fired. And as we started to ask, how are we want to address this? The conversation really shut down when we talked about any kind of major action, anything that had to do with work stoppage. So we began organizing, we primed the pump, so to speak, by doing an escalating series of actions to put pressure on management. And that's where I'll hand it over to Holly.
Yeah. So, we started with some strongly worded actions like letters to the editor, and email blasts, petitions, yard signs, and then standouts. Management wasn't budging. They continued to gaslight us. But we had rank and file union members sitting in on our return to school bargaining sessions. So they really saw how dire the situation was, how this was not going to be settled. The issue of health and safety was not going to be settled through some sort of backroom deal that the union was going to win for them. So, it's a week before we have to go back to school. We're really running out of options action-wise, and members were still afraid to even say the word strike, but they wanted to do something. So we had the idea to show up on school grounds with our laptops. We had Wi-Fi packs, porta potties, and we said, all right, we'll do our professional development, but we won't enter the buildings. And we brought that to a vote, and the members voted for it, and then they reaffirmed that vote. And this was really significant because, over the last many years, there's been a lot of fear and retaliation and hesitancy to be involved in any kind of action or union activity. So it was affirmed, and over 500 of our nearly 800 member union participated in this action across the district, including people who had never participated in any kind of union activity before.
So there, the day of the action, I think was a great success in terms of building camaraderie and solidarity. And we did get a lot of press as well, which was good. By that afternoon, our management had filed charges saying that we, filed a complaint saying that we had engaged in a legal strike. And so when we reconvened to talk about, okay, what are we going to do tomorrow? And the membership was pretty cowed overall, and voted to return back to the schools under duress. So we got some really great gains out of just even that one day of action. I mean, first of all, the people who became active during that summer, many who had never been active before, as Holly said, have remained active, and several of them have become leaders in their buildings. And we also did win an independent evaluation of our HVAC systems, and these buildings that supposedly had no issues actually had some really significant issues. My building alone had over 60, several which were urgent, that were addressed before the students came back to school. And probably most importantly, our very toxic superintendent resigned and was pushed out by our no confidence vote in our action. So but we did go back to the building the next day, and our memorandum of agreement came to an impasse, and we are now over 200 days without a contract. And there's no sign on the horizon that we're going to see movement on that. So what if our membership had felt empowered and wasn't obsessed and didn't have this psychological blockage because of this fear of, I can't do this if it's called this, or I can't, I can only go this far. If they had felt emboldened to stay out and continue with the action for as long as we needed to get what we demanded, I can't help thinking what we would have received. And we have so many examples around us, including our neighbors in Lawrence, who were able to stick it out. And so, we have a really positive story about organization, but in a sense, we're a little bit of a cautionary tale as well.
Thanks, Colette. Thanks, Holly. And I think what stood out to me was that in your buildings, people who participated in this action are now becoming leaders. They're organizing their colleagues. Like, that's the whole cycle of strike to organize. Like, I think, what did Kevin just pop in the chat box? Action creates activists. And that's why this is so critical. So let me introduce our last speaker. We'll talk about the campaign. And as we said at the beginning, like, we want their strikes have been commonplace throughout the last century to achieve really big wins. But with that said, over the next month, I think we have a pretty unique opportunity to try to put a lot of pressure to legalize the right to strike and to overturn the ban that has existed since 1919. So let me introduce Erica Eiderhoven to talk about the campaign, and then we'll do a call to action. So Representative Eiderhoven is a state representative in the Massachusetts legislature. She represents the 27th Middlesex District, which is encompasses the city of Somerville. She's a movement candidate. She's a great organizer and one of the sponsors for the right to strike bill, removing the ban. Erica.
Hey everyone, thank you all so much for having me. I'm really just honored to be standing in solidarity with you all today. And I just wanted to share something that kind of came up in my big breakout room in terms of what me reflect, why this is such an important issue to me. But, it's really that this fundamental belief that every worker has the right to define the conditions under which they work, right? This is what is a fundamental right to collective bargaining is about. And the key part of collective bargaining is our fundamental right to go on strike, and that is to collectively withhold our labor until all of our needs are met, until we all feel safe. And I just want to be clear, because I know something that comes up so much is that this this anti-worker corporate hegemony that controls our state, right, wants to reduce and minimize this struggle down to solely fighting for wages. And it is about wages, but it's more than that, right? It's about our livelihood, our health, our well-being, safety, and about being in true solidarity with each other at the workplace, and that, about fighting for the common good and for democracy. So to me, the reason why I filed this bill was that the strike is a tool to fight for the common good. And we need to bring back that muscle, right? That imagination that we deserve much better. And I think something too that's just, I wanted to share a perspective from the State House is educators are truly at the forefront of saving our public schools. There is an intentional and calculated attack by corporations emboldened by white supremacy to dismantle public education. And we know who these actors are. They're the Waltons, the Zuckerbergs, the Barr Foundation, Pioneer Institute. These are the wolves that are dressed in sheep's clothing, standing right outside of the schoolhouse door. And they are seeking to cut costs, commodify public education, commodify teachers and students, and render us disposable. And is in my own lifetime, they've whittled down curriculums to an MCAS score. And so for me, as a state rep, I will tell you that the State House, so far as it stands today, has served solely as a mouthpiece for corporations rather than serving as the people's house on every issue, but especially education. And I watch these day in and day out as a state rep, these privatizers dominate our discourse. And nothing has made that abundantly clear that this is what's going on than this traumatic year of the COVID pandemic, right? When Jeff Riley, DESE, the commissioner for DESE, says everyone back to your classrooms 5 days a week, no questions asked, he is undermining collective bargaining, right? He is also undermining CDC guidelines, and he is also saying that he's going to withhold Chapter 70 funding, that is equitable funding for the most hard-hit communities in the state, that he's going to withhold their funding if they don't follow his directive and bring everyone back 5 days a week. I mean, this is just absolutely draconian. And I'm sitting here in the position as a state rep, and the reality is we haven't done anything concrete to stand up to Riley. We've written a lot of letters. We've had a lot of meetings. I'm sure there were some stern conversation that no one got to listen into. But what have we done as state reps? Because my job is to represent you. My job is to work for my constituents. And we're not seeing that happen at all in the State House when we do nothing except for write letters and co-sponsor, and that's it, right? And so for me, this campaign and fighting for the right to strike is one that is both centered on organizing, solidarity, building our collective power across the state, because we absolutely need to, we have no choice. And that it is also about democracy, both in the workplace, but also in public life, right? Because this calls to question, if someone says, I'm with you, I love unions, I'm with organized labor, and then vote against the right to collective bargaining, they're lying to you. And that's just unacceptable. We can't have that anymore. We need to have a state house that is accountable to all of you, that is accessible to all of you, and that is transparent and is truth-telling, instead of one that negotiates behind closed doors and makes agreements with corporations at the forefront when we're deciding education policy. So that's what this campaign is about. And so I'm coming, I know, Ryan, you have some slides to share to sort of show us the kind of big ask. But like I said, right now, the only levers of power that my constituents have is to ask me to write letters or to co-sponsor things. And what we're asking in this campaign is to go to your state representatives. We're going to organize across the state, across districts, and demand my colleagues, state reps, to make two asks. One, stand for roll call on the right to strike, because we do need to get this vote recorded, right? Otherwise, it's going to go down as a voice vote, and there won't be any record of who voted which way or not. And this is one of the big issues, as we all know, Act en Masse was organized around for transparency, is to combat this. But we need my colleagues to stand for roll call with me, because we need 16 of us to get this recorded. And the second ask is to vote yes, right? Vote for the right to strike by removing this draconian, archaic law that is very much with us right now. It is shaping our conversations in communities across the state. Around our own safety and well-being. So that's the kind of two asks that we're organizing our districts around across the state. And here you can see, kind of this, our escalation arc throughout the campaign. So first, of course, sign up with the bit.ly link, bit.ly, right to strike. And we first, are kind of in this recruiting members and locals phase, and right now we're in the teach-in, but we're going to have more teach-ins moving forward, because really this is about organizing educators across the state and bringing people into the fold. I know a lot of folks are fairly engaged with their union. We really want to reach out to local members who are, maybe less involved, right, and try to bring them in around this issue. And then that's going to be followed with, a pressure meeting, tactics on your elected officials. I can tell you firsthand, I get a lot of emails, I get some phone calls, and I almost get no meetings with constituents. Not no, but I do get some, but like very, very few. And when I do have a meeting, right, it completely changes the conversation. And it really isn't, I want to be emphasized that this is not just a meeting to chummy with your state rep, which is what I think a lot of folks want them to be. But really, this is a pressure meeting, right, with hard asks. Are you with us? Which side are you on? Are you with us? Are you not on this issue? And so that's something that we'll be organizing across the, throughout the month. And then in late April, we're going to have the vote. And I'll just share just a very quick context. Why late April? Why now? I mean, I think I can't imagine a more perfect timing for this, just given what's going on and what DESE is doing and what they're getting away with. But also in the State House, rank and file members cannot force a vote on issues at any time. We really only have this one window of opportunity once a year during the budget. Otherwise, in terms of our opportunity to be able to vote on things, bills have to come out of committee, in which rank and file reps really have very little say around whether that happens, which is why, right, there's so many solutions we could be putting out there for both DESE, for the vaccine rollout, for all the things that our administration and our Republican governor has messed up. We could have been passing bills and we're not. And unfortunately, that's just something that I cannot force to happen. And that just shows you, right, why we are another mouthpiece to corporations. We're just standing idly by, letting this happen and not voting on bills. And so April is our chance to vote on this, because we have to vote on a budget every year, and that's usually takes place in late April. And the budget is sort of one of those unique bills where we can put any amendment to the bill. And that's why this is our kind of once in our year opportunity to force a vote on this issue, especially now, and strike the iron while it's hot. So I'm going to pause there. Ryan, is there anything I left out that we should share with folks on the campaign?
Can I jump in, Erica, for a second? Yeah. So, the other thing I want to let folks know about, I'm sorry, I was yelling earlier at a rally, so I've lost my voice. One thing I think additional opportunities as we're talking about this is the MTA and AFT and MAISA and other like Ed Justice Coalition partners are putting together legislative forums, some of which will happen before the budget vote. So we'll definitely get that info. Anybody who signed up to the Right to Strike website, we'll try to get the info out about attending those legislative and district meetings. They'll all be on Zoom. So I'd say even if you're not from that district, it's open to anybody. You don't have to be like a teacher, especially if you're another public sector worker and you're not in a teachers union, like please come to that space. We're going to be advocating for all sorts of things, but including the right to strike. And I think it's a good opportunity to put them on the spot the way you're discussing, Erica, to make your colleagues answer. You know, are you going to stand? You know, we know that Representative Eiderhoven is going to force a vote on this. Are you going to vote with us or against us? And I think that's one other opportunity. And the other thing I just want to let people know too is like after the April vote, regardless of what happens with that vote, you know, I think if we can demonstrate that like our union siblings across the public sector have an interest in this, then, you know, if hopefully we win in April and then like we suddenly have the right to strike. But if we don't, I think there's still a great fight here and a huge opportunity. And as Barbara was saying at the beginning, based on the history in Massachusetts, like there's been thousands and thousands of public sector strikes. So its legality, its status is one issue. Its viability as a tactic is another. And I think this campaign gives you a unique opportunity to talk strike in your worksite with your colleagues, with your union siblings. Just for the few weeks that I've been interested in this campaign, you know, I've been talking with a lot of MTA members about it, and even people who, you know, have not been super active in their local seem to be interested in this issue. So, you know, definitely stay plugged in, stay tuned. Let's try to get some pressure on the State House before the April vote. But let's also, you know, keep our eye on the prize. And this creates a space, which again, allows you to legally discuss the right to strike. And if anybody's gotten the flyer or seen the flyer, like maybe you got one in your building, that's how you came here tonight. Like, you know, it's fun to walk around your building with a giant or your work site or your shop floor, wherever you are, with a giant flyer that says strike in the middle. And there was more than one supervisor or principal that I've seen who, you know, were pretty freaked out by even seeing the literature in the building. So it's a great campaign. Thank you, Erica and Act on Mass for stepping up here.
Thanks, Kevin, for all the hard work you've been doing. That's all we got. Yeah. Please sign up. Union member, sibling, or ally. Don't have to be a member of a public sector union. And we'll be in touch with more information on signing up for a teach-in, where we'll come up strategies for every state rep district. We'll talk more about the movement, and we'll continue to build power. So please sign up, and we'll be in touch very soon. Thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you to our terrific, amazing organizer movement speakers. Have a good night. Bye everyone.